Stephen, welcome to the Washington Times God, Country, and the American Story. A lot to talk about today. Your film, Sheepdog, we're going to get into all of it. But this is really a great conversation for us to be having as Veterans Day is upon us, because the film, Sheepdog, deals with the issues that veterans go through. And before we specifically get into the movie, take me through, you have a really interesting story of how the topic of veterans sort of got on your radar. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so in 2011, my car broke down just 3 hours north of Los Angeles. And, I'd been driving through the night from Vancouver, Canada, where I was shooting a movie. I was really tired. I called the local tow truck company. And the guy that came out, was like, saddle up, partner. We got a 3-hour ride into the city. And during that drive, I don't think I said 3 words. And he began to open up to me about, the challenges that he was facing in his marriage, being a father of 3, his financial hardship. And then he began to open up about all of the medication that he was on that was sort of tethered to his military deployments. And throughout the conversation, he kept stopping himself and saying, I can't believe I'm telling you this. I haven't even told my wife.
Wow.
I haven't even talked to a therapist. So I get back to Los Angeles. He gets me back home safe. I thank him. I hug him, and I looked him in the eyes, and I was certain I would never see him again. And he probably wanted it that way. And the reason I say that is because, that week after that experience, which was the seminal moment that lit the spark, within me, and my curiosity, my sense of responsibility. I thought, listening without prejudice to his story and the freedom that he may never see me again, to be able to share that there's no judgment, no shame, it was just a catharsis, And so that week I began to journal about the experience. And about a month later, I'm on a film set. I was shooting a Western with Matt Dallas. And I told Matt, I didn't know Matt from before, we met on the film. And I told him about this experience I had with this tow truck driver and how I couldn't stop thinking about it, but how certain I was that there had to be more men and women like him across the country. So I said to Matt, look, if this becomes a screenplay, I don't know, but I have to tell these people's story. But the caveat is, and I think you should play my best friend, but the caveat is you have to go on the road with me and see it for yourself. And that summer, we did our first nationwide road trip, just meeting with veterans and anyone who would speak to us in the mental health care sector, and that was the beginning of it.
That's wild to me that you have this 3-hour ride. Obviously, I'm sure the frustration of a car breaking down, dealing with all that. You get in the car with this guy. He starts telling you all of this, and it literally shifts the entire trajectory of your professional life. And I mean, not only do you act in this film, do you star in it, you also directed it, you wrote it. I mean, this is a project that you took on. When you were on that, cross-country tour, kind of talking to people, how certain were you at that point that you were going to spend? I mean, you're talking now, this is like 14 years right now, as we're talking, 14 years from when that car broke down, that you would be spending more than a decade on this project. Were you pretty certain of that?
Yeah, and not in our wildest dreams that I think it would take this long. But I will tell you, I often get asked, you didn't want to quit, or, how could you keep going? Right. Here's the truth. The men and women that we sat in front of over the years, because it wasn't just one road trip, it was multi. And then it was all the years of, crashing on a veteran's couch or in their attic, or role playing with, mental health care professionals at the VA. And those folks became our North Star. They were the light that guided us home. So of course there was, frustration and challenges, and there were times inside where you wanted to quit, but you just remembered those folks that, shared their stories with you and had the courage to do so. One of the things that happened with one of the first veterans that Matt Dallas and I met with that summer in 2011, he handed me an in memoriam band, and it had the names of the fallen, of 3 of his fallen brothers he had served with that were killed in action uh, during a military operation in 2008. And he handed it out to me at the end of a conversation with him. And he said, "Don't let me down." And I remember I didn't want to take it because I didn't feel like I'd earned the moment. He was the first veteran that we had met with. And he said it again, "Don't let me down." And I remember I took the band, I went and sat in the car, and Matt and I looked at each other, and we 100% knew we had bit off more than we could chew. And we made a decision in that moment if we were going to go back to LA and call it a day, or if we were going to keep going, east into the country to meet with the other veterans. And in that moment, we decided we would complete the mission or die trying. That's how much it meant to us.
As you were going through and having these conversations, you're putting all this research together, and Sheepdog really, I mean, when you watch the film, you can tell you did your research. You can tell there's just so much substance there, and I want people to go to theaters and see it. But how did this change you, right? You went into this probably knowing what most of us do. Veterans work really hard. They compromise a lot. They give a lot up. But once you heard the stories and you understood the sheer impact on their lives of what serving has done, how did it shift you and change you?
Well, first of all, it was extremely humbling. I think that any kind of preconceived notion that one might have, it's completely shattered the moment you sit in front of somebody, especially somebody who's been in combat. But I think this is like multi-layered. Like, first off, the truth is it's these are ordinary people put in extraordinary circumstances. Most people cannot fathom to be in your early 20s in a foreign country. As my character says in the film, you're trained to do this job in a short period of time usually. And, when the gate comes down on the helicopter and you're looking at that terrain, feeling the heat on your face, and then you're going in, let's just say in the middle of a night to do a village sweep, jumping over 6-7 foot cinder block walls, playing the ultimate extreme sport. For many people, that's terrifying, right? It's not a movie. And I think about that because I often think about the men and women I sat in front of that could have easily been back home that summer, hanging out by the pool, drinking Bud Light, and they're serving their country. So there's that always used to, I never got comfortable with that. I always was so blown away of the courage that actually takes. And then the other part to that is what the families take on, right? So both of my brother-in-laws, my wife's brothers are combat vets. And one of her brothers, his last deployment was in 2016 to Afghanistan. And I had heard the stories of what it's like for a family to sort of be on bated breath when one of their loved ones is deployed. But I didn't know how that directly felt, knowing my niece and nephew and my mother-in-law, my wife. And I think that tremendous stress and, those long periods of time where you don't hear from that person and the worry. So I think that whole experience, was so fully encompassing that it's going to change you. And I think that my humility, I think, obviously the call to action to help tell those stories and share that with civilians, So yeah, I mean, it really is. I had the good fortune to be trusted and to help tell these stories.
Yeah, and you had the full creative control in this film too, which I think is really fascinating. Being able to obviously play the role of Kelvin Cole, and we'll talk about him in a moment, but to write it, to direct it. Was that the first time you had done all of those things?
To that degree, yes. I mean, I had worked on a few other things, but not like this, not like a serious, not at this level of responsibility, because beyond taking on all those duties, right, wearing those hats and producing it and raising the financing and all that stuff, the biggest challenge is getting it right. And that was a big thing. You are portraying folks, who have been been to hell and back, and then dealing with it in multi generations, right? Like Vietnam veterans and all the research that had to go into that to inform that, to authenticate it. So that was kind of, the bigger thing. But I have to tell you, we're we're out there right now. We're going to be going into theaters in December and then wide in January. But we made this on a shoestring budget. I think that we're the only film going into theaters this year that is probably under $10 million, but I'd say under five, easy. Um, and what happens, something special happens when you don't have money to throw at every problem. You're forced to trust your instinct. You have to act on your instinct. There was never a moment directing myself in the film that I ever went over into a corner and was like, what would Calvin do here? I had to just trust the words I had written on the page that had been informed by so many folks across the country, and trust the cast and my crew, and, tell the story.
And the story, just like what you heard in the car that day from that man who shared with you, the story is difficult. It is Calvin Cole's journey is really powerful. As you're watching the film, you're drawn into it. You want to know what's going to happen next. I was thinking the whole time, wow, how many people are going through this that I've walked past and I don't even know? How many people are struggling with these issues? And then also for me, this gratitude of the freedoms that we have in this country that we enjoy, that people have literally sacrificed themselves in so many ways, not just actively in war, but for years after as they deal with these issues. So tell us a little bit about Calvin Cole. And, I don't want you to give any spoilers, but what people are going to experience when they watch Sheepdog.
Well, so first I'll say it's an ensemble piece, right? So there's six main characters, and I wanted the audience to be able to identify themselves in at least one of those characters, whether it's your former hockey coach turned cop, your father-in-law who's a Vietnam veteran. We have Lily Cooper, who represents the military spouses, and Matt Dallas plays my best friend, and Virginia Madsen plays my trauma therapist. And it's a culmination of the countless stories that were shared over the years that each character represents. But for my character, the film begins where we're picking up 10 years after basically his last deployment. He's treatment adverse, and he's put in front of a judge, court ordered to do the time or do the treatment. And in that process of all things kind of coming to a head, where his father-in-law shows up on his doorstep, he's forced to come to terms with his past. And the film is a post-traumatic growth movie. It's not a post-traumatic stress movie. We do go there, and we have to deal with that heavy subject matter. But if my wish for folks that see it, especially if you've served, is to have a sense of hope that there is light at the end of the tunnel. You have to commit yourself to the work, but more importantly, you don't have to do it alone. And to know that it is okay to not be okay, and that there is help, there is resources, and it's worth committing to. And I have to just say this, from the bottom of my heart, because I've spent 14 years in this world, as a civilian, but there are so many success stories. I didn't just do research in 2011 and then move on. A lot of those folks are still in my life today, that I have the good fortune to call brother and sister, or mother. I have a Gold Star mother that she gave a toast at her wedding, and everyone's life that I saw get better. So many, peaks and valleys along the way, of course, was committing to doing the work. That could be treatment, that could be community work. I mean, it could be so many different things. And I think that that's really important. And that truly is the message of the film.
I love that. Have you encountered faith a lot along the way in terms of how people have dealt with how veterans have dealt with the issues, how you've even processed some of this? It was an undertone in this film for sure. So I'm just curious, because obviously when we're dealing with people and trauma, we're dealing with the mental, the physical, but we often don't talk about the spiritual part of it. It's sort of like we're going to deal with these other things and ignore probably the most important part of that puzzle. So I was just curious your reflections on that after spending so much time in this world.
Yeah. So So I grew up in the church. I went to Sunday school every Sunday. And I remember, gosh, I must have been 8 or 9. And I remember saying to one of my Sunday school teachers, I was talking to her privately about being really scared in the dark. Um, and she said to me, all you have to say, Stephen, is God is love. And it worked. And I've never shared that. And that's the truth. And anytime I'd been really scared, I felt that way. That carried through with me into my storytelling, where, yes, I met a lot of folks that had very strong faith, and there are a lot of subtle undertones in the film regarding that. Like there's this line that I wrote where I say, my mom used to say that the grace of God won't take you where the will of God won't protect you. And in that moment, I found myself praying to a God I hadn't spoke to in a long time. And I think that there's a lot of people that can relate to that, in terms of our when it's convenient, or we just get distanced. Life gets so busy and there's so many things and distractions and so on. And I found myself sort of in the process of telling the story, kind of coming back to my own faith, because you're surrounded by a lot. I mean, it's not just trauma, it's complexities of family dynamics, it's loss, it's all these things. And you yourself are looking for that rock, that pillar. You yourself, as the storyteller, are trying to find that strength. And I genuinely found that, returning to my own faith, And so I felt that was important to show in the film, because there are all aspects of our lives that we can draw on to help us get through, and to be better people. And I think that was important to show that in the film. And again, it wasn't just my own experience. It was what I myself experienced sitting in front of people and spending times with families across the country.
No, I love that. That is powerful. Now, Sheepdog, you mentioned it's coming to theaters. Obviously, you also have this really great Pay It Forward campaign for veterans, first responders. Talk a little bit about where people can go if they want to see the film, obviously get information, but that Pay It Forward part of the puzzle too.
Sure. So we are, so lucky to have partnered with VetTix, which is a nonprofit that gives tickets to veterans and first responders and their families across the country. We're the first film to partner with them. So if you go to sheepdogthemovie.com, there's a link there that if you're a civilian and you want to pay it forward and you want to send veterans, first responders, and their families to the movies to see Sheepdog, you can do that. If you're a veteran or a first responder and you're not a member at VetTix, you can sign up for free. They give out tickets to music concerts and sporting events and so on. So they're a really great organization, and we're making a larger sort of national announcement about that in the coming week. But then we'll be in select theaters in December, and then we'll be nationwide in January.
All right, final question for you. This obviously changed your trajectory and how you were storytelling and what you were focusing on. When all is said and done with Sheepdog, does this shift the way you do your craft moving forward? I'm just curious, and I know it's hard to predict what comes next, but I would imagine you've pondered and thought a lot about that.
That's a really good question. So I'll tell you this. I have a 13-month-old, and I'm so happy. He's healthy. He's happy. My wife's healthy. I have been, given a lot of opportunities in the last little bit here, and I honestly just, after this experience, before I do anything else, I just want to spend time with my family. I think that this has been, in this 14-year journey, I've given everything I have. I could walk away after this. I really could. I'm just so proud of what we created. I'm so grateful for the profound response that we've got to the film. But I think I just, for me, what's on the horizon is just sort of like family time. And I'm really looking forward to that in February, March. But no, I'd love to tell stories. And, I've written things, other things that are sort of potentially in the pipeline. But I think that no matter what I do, I want it to have purpose, and I want it to serve. The story needs to serve folks. It has to help people. It has to, entertain them, but it has to have a message that can, touch hearts and impact people positively.
Well, I love that. The film is Sheepdog, sheepdogthemovie.com. Appreciate you taking the time today.
Billy, thank you so much.